It is a Friday edition of Locked On Grizzlies. Which Memphis Grizzlies could potentially make an appearance in the 2028 Olympic Games? I'll discuss that. Plus, two Memphis Grizzlies players that made the Athletics under 21-year-old draft. We'll talk about that and more on this episode of Locked On Grizzlies. Let's lock in.
You are Locked On Grizzlies, your daily Memphis Grizzlies podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Yes. It is Friday. You've got to get down on Friday. As a wise philosopher, Rebecca Black once said, fun. Looking forward to the weekend. It is Joe Mullinax with you on this episode of Locked On Grizzlies, and we are partying indeed, heading into another wonderful weekend here. And I'm so glad that you're with us here on Locked On Grizzlies to help as part of the process. No DeMichael Cole on this episode. Lots of Grizzlies news and pieces that he's working on over at the Commercial Appeal as the Memphis Grizzlies beat writer for that publication. Things that we can talk more about on Monday. Nice little hint that Monday's episode should be pretty interesting as well. But it is Friday, and I'm glad that you're with me on this edition of Locked On Grizzlies. This episode of Locked On Grizzlies is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. The Olympics are winding down. Sports are going to stop sportsing the way we want them to for a little while. But this summer, FanDuel is hooking up all customers with a boost or a bonus daily. That's right. There's something for everyone every day, all summer long. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. We are free and available wherever you get podcasts as proud members of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team each and every single day. Like, comment, rate, review, subscribe. Literally anywhere you get a podcast, you can get Locked On Grizzlies. Make sure you're with us on YouTube, but also make sure you're subscribing on the go with the audio version of the show over on Apple, Spotify, Amazon. Literally anywhere you get a podcast, whether you're sitting in front of a computer or screen and you're able to watch my beautiful glistening head, or if you just enjoy the nice and soft tones of my baritone audio-wise, however you're taking in this episode, make sure you're liking, commenting, rating, reviewing, and subscribing. Make sure you're an everydayer every time an episode drops of Locked On Grizzlies. As DeMichael and I have talked about a little bit, it is August, a little bit of a lighter time for Memphis, barring some breaking news. We will be doing 3 episodes a week for the month of August, and that obviously continues today with our third and final show for the week. No DeMichael, as I mentioned, but he's here with us in spirit, dear listener, dear viewer. And here's what I mean by that. We are going to lead off this episode of Locked On Grizzlies with a conversation from a piece that DeMichael Cole wrote over at the Commercial Appeal, and it's about the 2028 Olympics. Now, hopefully, you're sitting there listening, watching, dear listener, dear viewer, and you're thinking to yourself, Joe, the 2024 Olympics aren't quite over yet. We still have a gold medal match and a bronze medal match. We still have some things to take care of over the weekend, and that is fair, dear listener, dear viewer. But only one Memphis Grizzly was a part of the Olympic fun this year, I should say. That was Santi Aldama, and he didn't last long, right? The Spaniards didn't stick around for the knockout round. They were sent home after the group stage. So Santi Aldama, not a part of the process. But going into 2028, DeMichael pretty boldly, at least in my opinion, boldly says that the Memphis Grizzlies could theoretically have 6, count them, 6, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 Olympians on their roster. So let's go down this list that DeMichael cultivated for us, and you can let me know in the comments if you agree or disagree. The big 3 for the Memphis Grizzlies: John Morant, Jaren Jackson Jr., Desmond Bane. Those are the 3 probably most obvious candidates, right? Aside from Santi himself with his already very clear connection to Spain. If John Morant is healthy, he's going to be in this mix. We have to remember several of the current members of Team USA, LeBron James, Kevin Durant, Steph Curry. This is almost certainly their last dance with Team USA. Joel Embiid has the Cameroon, France kind of thing hovering over him. Maybe this is the only time Joel plays for Team USA. There's going to be several openings, is the point. And with those openings, you would have to imagine that John Morant is going to be one of the most dynamic players in the NBA over the next few years. And if that is indeed the case, why wouldn't he be in the Olympic conversation for Team USA? He probably would have been on this year's team, DeMichael says in his article over at the Commercial Appeal. He's the least surprising inclusion. I agree with you, DeMichael. And again, it's like he's here with us. He sounds so nice and he looks so great, but I'm giving the good word of DeMichael Cole on this episode of Locked On Grizzlies. Jaren Jackson Jr. already has experience with Team USA, and that's exactly right. That's important to remember. Jaren Jackson Jr. played and is already in the Team USA system, having been part of the FIBA World Cup last year. The Americans underachieved in that World Cup, not trying to act like they didn't. Jaren played center most of that time. But if Jaren gets to play at the 4, there's a lot of room for growth. We have to remember he's still so young, only 24 years old. He'll be, goodness gracious, 28, right there in the prime of his career when the Olympics are hosted by the United States there in 2028. And then Desmond Bane, if he hadn't been injured, he would have been a part of that FIBA World Cup team last year. That's pretty clear. Grant Hill wanted Bane on that team pretty badly. Bane's going to be a part of Team USA at some point. It just is a matter of time. When does that actually happen? Chances are it is the next time the FIBA cycle comes around, and you'll see Bane in that mix. Obviously, the Los Angeles Olympics are a major goal for a lot of these American-born players. It'd be pretty cool to see 3 American-born players from the Memphis Grizzlies part of that process in the Los Angeles games. And I think you can make a legitimate argument for all of them. Desmond Bane as a floor spacer, as a creator of offense. Jaren defensively and his versatility there. He's grown as an isolation scorer in his own right. And John Morant's the easiest one to make an argument for. He'd probably be on this year's team, 2024, if his shoulder injury hadn't occurred. 2 players for Canada that could potentially be from the Memphis Grizzlies. Zach Edey is the most obvious candidate because Edey was on Team Canada to begin with, right? He withdrew his name from consideration for the roster after he was drafted by the Grizzlies. DeMichael and I have talked about that a lot on this show, here, there, everywhere. My frustration, didn't play a ton in Summer League. He probably would have been better off playing in the Olympics, to be honest with you. But he helped develop chemistry, got to know his teammates. DeMichael talked about on a recent episode the chemistry he was able to build with guys like Desmond Bane, just kind of hanging out, laying low. There's value to that, obviously, for Memphis. So maybe it was best for Memphis. I'm not sold that it was best for Zach Edey. But Zach Edey being part of it in 2028, he'll have 3 NBA seasons under his belt by the time he gets there, as DeMichael points out in his article. He almost certainly could be Canada's starting center. The name that maybe folks have forgotten about when it comes to being in the Team Canada mix is Brandon Clark. Tore his Achilles, of course, and that led to him not being involved in these Paris Olympics. He wouldn't mind joining the Canadian process in the future. He's told that to DeMichael in the past. This is from Clark himself. I haven't really done much for them ever. Stars haven't really aligned for him. He's always had something going on in the offseason. He hopes that he can play for them at some point. So that's a goal. That's something that he has stated, hey, he'd be interested. All the more reason to take it seriously. So John Morant, Desmond Bane, Jaren Jackson Jr., Zach Edey, Brandon Clark for Canada, obviously the prior 3 for the USA. And that leaves us with Santi Aldama, who's already very much involved in the Spain plans. Extremely a sure bet, in my opinion, almost a certainty to be in that mix for his country. Probably more so than anybody on the list, which is why, as we wrap up this conversation, if I'm going to rank them, I'm going to put Santi Aldama number 1. And this is not in terms of he's better than John Morant. It's in terms of I'm ranking the likelihood that they make Team USA, Canada, or Spain, whichever team they are representing. Santi's already on Team Spain. Santi is going to be in the prime of his career around the time, or close to the prime of his career, around the time of the 2028 Olympics. I think it stands to reason that we're going to see Santi Aldama playing for Team Spain, barring injury, in the 2028 Olympics. I'm going Santi number 1. Number 2 is John Morant. Again, if John Morant is healthy, he's one of the top 12 or so NBA players on the planet. I have a feeling he's going to be playing for Team USA, especially considering they're going to have a point guard void with Steph Curry gone. Don't say Tyrese Halliburton. I disagree with you. Number 3 is where it gets a little bit more fishy, right? It gets a little bit more difficult. I think for number 3, I'm going to go Zach Edey, because he was already in the mix for the roster this year, likely would have made it. I think at that point, again, with some veteran presence to him after 3 NBA seasons, him being that starting center for Team Canada makes a lot of sense, especially if you're going to have to compete with the Wembanyamas of the world moving forward. Give me Edey at 3. I think that I'm going to go with Jaren Jackson Jr. at 4. Again, because of that prior FIBA experience, he's already in the Team USA system. I'll go Desmond Bane at 5 for Team USA, Brandon Clark at 6, because he just simply hasn't had any. There's been very few rumblings or inklings of Clark. We've heard that a bit with Bane. So again, that's my list. Santi, he's a lock for Team Spain. John Morant, a lock for Team US, in my opinion, if he's healthy. I think that it gets a little bit more iffy after that. Edey was probably going to make their roster for Canada. Then you've got Jaren, who's been in the mix in FIBA World Cup action for the U.S., Bane, and then Clark. Let me know if you agree with my rankings. Who and how cool would it be if there were 6 Grizzlies in the Olympics when the party comes to this side of the pond, so to speak, and it's the United States that's playing host in 2028. When we come back here on Locked On Grizzlies, we are going to take a look at a piece from The Athletic where they did a draft of players under the age of 21 or 21 and under. And GG Jackson was ranked pretty high in this process. I'm going to explain what I mean by that here momentarily. But first, this episode of Locked On Grizzlies is brought to you by BetterHelp. What are your self-care non-negotiables? The things that you say, I have to get this done, not for anybody else, just for me. Maybe you're in the gym and you never skip leg day, or maybe you're somebody who likes to go out and get a run in every day, get some cardio going. Maybe for you, it's therapy and making sure that you make time for yourself to talk with someone else. Even when we know what makes us happy, it's hard to make time for it. But when you feel like you have no time for yourself, non-negotiables like working out or therapy are more important than ever before. If you're thinking of starting therapy, you should seriously give BetterHelp a try, because whether your schedule's packed with kids' activities, big work projects, or anything else, you have to make time for you. It's entirely online, designed to be convenient, flexible, and suited to your schedule. You fill out a brief questionnaire, get matched with a licensed therapist, and you can switch therapists at any time for no additional charge. Never skip therapy day with BetterHelp. Visit BetterHelp.com/LockedOnNBA today to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/LockedOnNBA. When we come back here on Locked On Grizzlies, talking about the Athletics 21 and under draft, GG Jackson being a high draft pick. Stick around. Welcome back to this episode of Locked On Grizzlies. I am Joe Mullinax, so excited to be with you. Missing DeMichael Cole, as I always do when I'm flying solo, but he's a busy guy. Lots of stuff coming out over the commercial appeal that we'll be able to talk about with him on Monday, including perhaps some preseason schedule fun. Always nice to think about basketball a couple months in advance, right? But it's going to be good to have DeMichael back, and that'll be our Monday episode. On this episode, I want to continue the conversation about interesting content coming out this time of year. This is always the time of year where people get a little bit more fun and wacky and experimental. Shout out to The Athletic for doing something along that line of thinking. The title of the article over at The Athletic is NBA All 21 and Under Mock Draft. Victor Wembanyama, Paolo Banchero top the list. When Wembanyama goes first, you can make an argument if you increase this to 26 years old, it probably still would be Wembanyama. But Wembanyama goes first. Paolo Banchero of the Orlando Magic goes second in this draft. And I'm just going to give you the general rules because it'll make sense with Zach Edey here later, because you might be sitting there wondering, Joe, isn't Zach Edey 22? The goal was any player who was 21 or younger at the end of this past season. So Edey just recently turned 22. That was the goal. They had to be eligible in terms of NBA draft and that sort of stuff. Like Cooper Flagg's not on this list, that sort of thing. The Athletics' James L. Edwards III, Kelly Iko, and Will Gilroy all did this draft. They picked 3 teams of 8 players. That means 24 total names were selected. And you can imagine my surprise when I was reading this piece and Wembanyama went first, Paolo Banchero second. You had Alperen Sengun of the Rockets third, then Brandon Miller of the Charlotte Hornets, Derek Lively of the Mavericks, which is interesting. And then number 6 for Edwards was GG Jackson of the Memphis Grizzlies. This is what Edwards had to say about GG. The league is always looking for 6'9" wings who have potential 3-level scoring. I thought Jackson really popped as a rookie in an unfavorable situation last season in Memphis. Jackson was near the top of every team's scouting report and still put up solid numbers for a teenager. He doesn't turn 20 until December. I have time on my side here. Fascinating development, because that means GG Jackson was selected in front of names like Jabari Smith Jr., Jonathan Kuminga, Amen Thompson, Cam Whitmore. I'm just going down the list. Scoot Henderson, Stephon Castle, who was just drafted by the San Antonio Spurs. GG Jackson went in front of all of those guys. And I think that this is a friendly reminder that GG went 45th overall in his draft, right? A year ago now. GG Jackson was a player that was not viewed as highly as he most certainly is viewed as now. Most outlets saw GG as a top 5 or 10 pick in the draft that just concluded if he had stayed with his original class. He came out a year early. like we talked about. And that is one of the reasons he's so young. Doesn't turn 20 until December. He will still be one of the NBA's youngest players going in to this, his sophomore season in the league. So there's so many reasons to be so high on GG Jackson. The 3-level scoring is an obvious one. But as we've talked about here before, his defense has improved. He's not elite there by any stretch of the imagination, but in the year that he's been a part of the Memphis Grizzlies organization, he's gone from a possible liability on that end to a net neutral. And to be honest with you, that's really all you need from a guy that can score the basketball the way that GG Jackson does. He's entering the rarefied era of a guy like a Joe Morant. Joe said that Joe Morant and GG Jackson are the same. It's not what I said. GG Jackson has the offensive talent that if he's not some elite defensive stopper, he's still going to be a pretty big net positive for you because of his ability to score. We've also seen him rebound better. And that leads you to believe he can play the foursome. And if GG Jackson can play the foursome, that makes a very interesting versatility mismatch creating lineup for the Memphis Grizzlies, if not this season, down the road. We know that GG has to be a better facilitator. It's been talked about by me oftentimes. I need to see him doing that kind of skill set in particular if he's logging a lot of minutes alongside the likes of Ja Morant, Desmond Bane, and Jaren Jackson Jr. Because no offense to GG, at this stage of his career, I want those three guys taking those shots before I want GG Jackson taking them. But if he is going to be a second scoring option with a bench unit, by all means, GG, go to work. Go be that microwave scorer off the bench. And I do think that is the ideal role for him going into this next season on a team that is trying to contend for a championship. What a wonderful luxury to have. A young player like that under contract for the next 3 seasons that you can really invest in and develop and watch grow in the rotation. And oh, by the way, I want to stress I'm not advocating for this. But if you're looking at GG Jackson as one of the best young prospects in the entire NBA, that would be a pretty attractive trade chip. And in the past, what has been one of the major issues that the Memphis Grizzlies have had? The players that they had on their roster, the prospects, the David Roddies, the Jake LaRavias, they did not hold value outside of the Grizzlies organization. I can assure you that that is not the case when it comes to GG Jackson. This Athletic article is a great example of that. GG was selected in front of first-round picks. GG was selected in front of lottery guys in terms of talent. GG Jackson looks to be one of the best value young players in the entire NBA. In fact, going by these rankings, Wembanyama went first overall. Banchero was high up in those drafts. I think Sengun went 10th. Miller was in the top 5. Derek Lively, I think he was 15 or so for the Mavericks. GG is the best, lowest draft pick among this list. So what am I trying to say? I'm trying to say that the Memphis Grizzlies' flexibility is greater than it's ever been because they actually have a prospect that if they really want to go like for a Lauri Markkanen, if Golden State was interested in listening on Kuminga with Utah for Markkanen, GG Jackson should be in that conversation too. Now, I'm not advocating for that. At some point, the rent comes due. Roster building would be much more difficult if they went all in with Markkanen on his new contract. Once he's able to be traded, that would be very difficult. GG is signed under contract. It's very team friendly. It's highly unlikely GG gets traded. But it's a wonderful development that they actually have a potential prospect that other teams would want in a trade. And you're not just saying, oh, let's put John Conchar, Zaire Williams, and 5 first-round picks out there and see if anybody will bite. Chances are nobody's going to bite on that. GG Jackson, Luke Kennard, and 4 first-round picks? Maybe that's a little more attractive to a team out there. And I want to stress, I like GG. I think GG's going to be in Memphis for a while. It's an interesting change of dynamic that you have a young player like that that has that kind of value, not just to the Memphis Grizzlies organization, but to the NBA at large. Zach Edey also made this list despite now being 22 years old. He was 21 when the season ended, and he got drafted. We'll talk about where Edey is viewed upon by this athletic staff here momentarily, how he's viewed. But I want to remind you of Locked On NBA. Make that your second listen, your second watch. After you're done with Locked On Grizzlies, go check out Locked On NBA. Lots of great content covering the ins and outs of the NBA offseason. various roster moves, obviously with the Olympics going on, some coverage of that. Locked On NBA, check it out wherever you get your podcasts as proud members of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team each and every day. And in that case, your league each and every day. This episode of Locked On Grizzlies is brought to you by FanDuel. I love sports. I know you love sports too, dear listener, dear viewer. I love them so much that I never want them to stop. But the Olympics are about to come to their conclusion, and sports are going to stop sportsing the way we want them to. We're going to get fewer games. FanDuel understands that. They get us. They are going to keep the sports going whenever we want them to. All we have to do is open up the app and dream up bets anytime that we're in the mood. This summer, FanDuel is hooking up all of its customers with a boost or a bonus daily. You heard me correctly. That is right. Something for everyone every day, all summer long. You want to head over to FanDuel.com, start making the most out of your summer, not just with Major League Baseball, but you could also look into futures bets for the NBA, awards odds, over-unders. There's all sorts of different things that you can go check out over at FanDuel. So head over there again, FanDuel.com. Make the most out of your summer with FanDuel, an official sports betting partner of Major League Baseball. When we come back here on Locked On Grizzlies, closing out this episode of the show, talking Zach Edey and his place on the Athletics list. Stick around. Welcome back to Locked On Grizzlies. I am Joe Mullinax, flying solo. No to Michael Cole on this episode. Thank you so much for being here. I already am looking forward to our Monday edition of the show. DeMichael will be back. The Grizzlies preseason schedule might have been fully released. We'll have lots of fun things to continue to talk about as the August offseason dog days grind forth on our Monday episode of the podcast. But we're finishing up our Friday edition of the show. I've been talking about this piece from The Athletic. Again, the title, NBA All 21 and Under Mock Draft. Victor Wembanyama, Paolo Banchero top the list. So after you're done reading DeMichael's work over the Commercial Appeal, go check out this piece and get a little bit more context beyond the Grizzlies specific things that I'm sharing with you. You have to go down to round number 8, I believe. Yes, round number 8, pick number 23, literally the second to last pick of the draft. He gets selected by Gilroy. He's the final pick of the draft. And here is what Will Gilroy had to say about Zach Edey, number 23 out of 24 selections. Edey is the number one guy on my list of players from the 2024 draft, who I think we're going to end up looking back and saying, how did that guy not go top 5? He's going to be one of the most enormous players we've ever seen in the NBA, giving Yao Ming vibes. We've talked about that before. That's my side note there. Back to Gilroy. And he's going to be a fantastic fit in Memphis next to John Morant and Jaren Jackson Jr. I also think people are sleeping on how much Edey's body has improved over time. He was in fantastic shape during Summer League. He's not nearly as slow or immobile as some people like to portray him. And I think that last sentence is extremely important, right? The last couple of sentences there. I think that so much of like the Kristen Peak thinking it's one of the worst picks in the history of the NBA. There's this like big goofy guy vibe that people that don't believe, and Zach Edey seem to connect to him, and that's not him at all. Look at his measurables from the draft combine, where he was one of the fastest guys in several drills, one of the most mobile bigs at the combine. It helps to have 7'4" frame and legs, but he also has the capacity to move. He is not this big, fat, unable to slide his feet big that some try to make him out to be. He has the capacity to move his feet. And at his size, of course, he's naturally going to be slower than some players, most players even. But the way that he understands angles, his body positioning, the strength that he brings to the table, there are so many ways that he can make up for a lost step or two. And I think that that makes him extremely enticing for exactly what Will said in that piece. How in the world did he fall to 9? That's a good question. This is a guy who dominated college basketball, was the best college basketball player on the planet the last 2 years. He was dominant. And he's not going to be asked to do all the things that he had to do in college for the Memphis Grizzlies. He's going to be a screener. He's going to be a rebounder, maybe a little better of a passer. He's not going to have to play 48 minutes a game. Again, he played the entire national championship game, Edey did. The entire game. Is that something that somebody that's out of shape and unable to run is going to be able to do at 7'4", 300 pounds? Of course not. He has to be physically in shape. He has to be in tune with his body, and he most certainly is that. I think Edey is going to be a tremendous fit too. I've talked about it numerous times. I like Donovan Clingan because I thought he was more versatile. But Edey is not a bad plan B. Edey is a guy that is going to come in and be able to help anchor your reserve unit. He's probably going to start. That makes the most sense to me. I've said that here on Locked On Grizzlies before. Said it over on Josh Lloyd's podcast. Make sure you're checking that out if you haven't done so. Look up Memphis Grizzlies Locked On Fantasy Basketball. But I've talked about Edey as the starter, essentially replacing Steven Adams, trying to fill a lot of what Adams did. He's not the passer that Adams was, but he certainly can be the screener, and he certainly can be the rebounder. There's no reason he can't do those things as a rookie. And then you have Edey's rim protection, the size that he provides, the capacity for Jaren Jackson Jr. to now be a free-flowing defender off of Edey as opposed to being the anchor. We know that Jaren's better at that. So Edey is going to help the Memphis Grizzlies tremendously, but I also think all these odds saying he's one of the favorites for Rookie of the Year, yeah, he should be, because he's going to get plenty of opportunity on a team that is trying to win. He is going to compete. He is going to be a positive contributor, or at least he's going to have the opportunity to be a positive contributor. So I really liked Will's point on that about him being in much better shape than he actually is, or excuse me, than people perceive him to be. He is actually in better shape than people perceive him to be. He's not this big plodding center that doesn't have the capacity to move. And I thought that pick kind of put Gilroy's team over the top. He had Banchero, Derek Lively, Jonathan Kuminga, Scoot Henderson, Josh Giddey, Jeremy Sochan, Shaedon Sharpe, Zach Edey. I liked Gilroy's team the best personally myself. I'm a big fan of the Edey pick. I think having Lively and Edey on the same team, he's going to dominate in the front court, safe to say. I really, really, really like how Edey can be that rim protector that can do a variety of things. I am thrilled with Zach Edey being on the team. I think that he is going to do great things for Memphis, and he has already been asked to do so much. That's another thing I like. Again, don't underestimate the chemistry aspect of this. Don't underestimate how Edey is going from being the literal and almost entire Purdue offense and Purdue scheme to being a piece of an already successful puzzle when everybody's healthy and on the court. I think that's going to do wonders for him, and it's going to allow for him to ease into his NBA career as opposed to being asked to be the guy where he maybe would have struggled more. Being a bench scorer for 4 to 6 minutes a game where you're back to the basket, I think that can happen in the NBA. A majority of the time, he's going to be setting screens, getting rebounds, and he's going to be potentially elite at that from the very beginning in the NBA. Thank you guys so much for being with me on this episode of Locked On Grizzlies. It is much appreciated. Thank you for making Locked On Grizzlies your first watch, your first listen. Now go make Locked On NBA your second listen, your second watch. They do a tremendous job over there. Nick Angstad and all the others covering all the ins and outs of the NBA offseason, what teams are doing. Obviously, with the Olympics wrapping up, there will be conversations about that. Go check out Locked On NBA if you haven't already done so. After this episode is complete, go and take a look. On Monday, DeMichael will be back. We'll be talking Grizzlies preseason and all other sorts of Olympic fun as the Olympics wind down there in Paris, France. It's going to be a great episode. I highly recommend and hope that you'll be joining us for it. Thank you so much for joining me on this episode of Locked On Grizzlies, proud member of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team each and every single day. I'm your co-host, Joe Mullinax. We are free and available wherever you get podcasts as proud members of the Locked On Podcast Network. Like, comment, rate, review, subscribe. Apple, Spotify, Amazon, YouTube, literally anywhere you get a podcast, you can get Locked On Grizzlies. Stay safe out there. Have a wonderful weekend. Make sure that you are enjoying yourself, getting some rest and relaxation, and we'll meet you back here on Monday. Stay locked in. Have a good one.